Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Lost Decades podcast, covering the years 1400 to 1370 BC.
Whoa.
I'm Austin,
I'm Andrew.
and we're going to take you on a tour through history, through the Bronze Age. I kind of think of this episode in my mind is like the pre-Amarna letters or pre-Amarna period. And that period is a time when they have a bunch of letters and tablets from Egypt, mainly to all these other places that we're going to talk about. So we're kind of getting the beginning of that. But this one, I think we're going to talk about all of the major players that are going to go through the rest of the Bronze Age before the collapse. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I found this story that's like I guess just an ancient Egyptian story from this time called The Taking of Joppa. It's an ancient Egyptian tale describing the conquest of the Canaanite town of Yapu or Joppa by Thutmose III's general Jehuti. And it's basically seen as a pure literary account, just like a made up story about it. But there is really a general named Jehuti that served under Thutmose III in Egypt. And the beginning of the tale is lost, but at some point, the Jehuti invites the Prince of Joppa to a party in his camp outside the town. And then Jehuti knocks him out and hides 200 of his soldiers in sacks, which he has loaded onto pack animals, and sends a charioteer to announce to the town that the Egyptians have surrendered and are sending tribute. So they were like sieging the town, and then they go into the city and obviously conquer it. But what does
So
that
it's basically
remind?
like an OG Trojan horse, but
Exactly, yeah. And apparently that's also a thing in Alibaba and the 40 Thieves has another thing like that. So jumping into Egypt, we have a pharaoh here named Thutmose the Fourth, and he
yeah,
ruled from 1400 to 1390. What do
yeah.
you want to tell us about?
Well, more just that, I mean, it's kind of funny how history has to be it's mostly pieced together. And the reason I'm saying that is we think, or at least they think, that he was a usurper. And the main reason for that is that he goes through so much trouble to justify why he should be king and not his older brother. But it's always possible his older brother died before him. But it feels like, yeah, he kind of just ousted his brother and usurped the power because of his famous thing that I think you saw too, probably. He's most famous for he was obsessed with the Sphinx and he claimed that he fell asleep underneath the Sphinx when it was, which I thought was interesting too. They said at this time the Sphinx had been, because of all the sand and stuff, buried all the way up to its neck.
Sort of
And
like when I
so,
think Napoleon found it, it was also like that.
yeah. And so he fell asleep underneath it and had a dream that said that if he would restore the Sphinx, clear out all the sand, and restore it to its former glory, then he would get to sit on the throne, which is very convenient for him because that's what he wanted.
Right.
So,
It's called the dream stele, right? It says that he
yeah.
fell asleep in the shadow of the half-buried
Well,
Sphinx.
because the reason we know this at all is because after he did this, he put a stele, like a carved stone, that just explained everything. This whole process of him having the dream and how it called to him. But one of the key things I thought was interesting reading about it was they said that um he was focused on other gods and the Sphinx, and he made no mention of Amun at all, which
Right.
is another precursor, which I'll get into a little bit later, but of this interesting shift in Egypt away from just the old ways of doing it in terms of religion, the old gods and stuff, and kind of looking at something new.
Keep it in mind because, yeah, it's a subtle shift, but it does seem like this Sphinx apparently was over time seen as the embodiment of some form of Ra, the sun god. So there is this shift happening towards the sun god and away from Amun, who's more of like a
Yeah,
sky.
because he was very obsessed with Ra, and at very least Amun Ra, which was the most common one
Yes.
for this dynasty in general, which is already showing the thing. But like we talked about with um, Amenhotep the second, he was also more interested in that. He was like, oh, there's the sun god seems pretty cool. It's just funny how this has been
Mhm.
passed down, if you will.
I know. Well, I'm wondering, like, do you have any theories on it? I was trying to think about it. I think I saw somewhere that it might involve like rejecting the power of the priests because we talked about how the priests are so powerful. They're basically the government officials. So maybe if you switch the god away from Amun, then it kind of shifts the priest power a little bit towards
No,
you.
that makes sense. It's just the other thing I thought that kind of tracks is that when you're in a time period where there's no military conflict and no constant, noble revolts and all this stuff, you can kind of give yourself time to like reassess theology, technology, and different things like
Mhm.
that. They had more time to sit around and
Yeah.
contemplate like, well, what do we think about a moon? And what about Ra? And what about some of these other gods? Instead of just being like, well, I'm already fighting the Nubians and I'm fighting these guys. I don't have time to deal with this, so I'm just going to go through the motions and do it anyway. I don't know. It's like they had more free time on their hands to think about these kinds of things.
Totally. And
Because they
and I,
talk about that Thutmose IV only had like two known military expeditions at all, and he wasn't involved with them. Like he was, but what I mean is he wasn't leading them. So there was a revolt in Nubia, but it was very small, and he crushed that. And then there was something where he claimed to be conqueror of Syria that they think was just another revolt
mhm,
that he put down.
I did see
Um,
that. Yeah, up to like Ugarit.
yeah, but his big thing was how he made peace relations with the Mitanni. Technically, it started with his dad, Amenhotep II, but nothing was ever finalized, and so he was the one to actually marry a princess from the Mitanni kingdom. And I read this whole thing too. It was funny. Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole. They're like, they actually think that maybe Amenhotep III, again, Thutmose IV's son, actually was the son of this Mitanni princess. And they're like, actually, that's not true because he was born, Amenhotep III was born before Thutmose even took the throne, which would have been way before he even married this princess and made this peace treaty. So that makes no sense. They're like, that's definitely not true.
Yeah.
Um,
I do
but
have some things you can call me out because I do have a couple things coming up with different Mitanni and Hittites about their granddaughter getting married to a Egyptian pharaoh.
Yeah, they said people are just confused on the name. A lot of people just thought that his main bride was that Mitanni princess, and they're like, there's no way that could even physically happen. It would only be that if there were, for some reason, he had married her way before he became king. So those were the things I saw. The other thing I thought was cool was that he built the tallest, not the largest, I guess, distinction, the tallest obelisk. I wrote down where it is the Piazza San Giovanni. We went there several times and we saw the obelisk. And I thought it was cool because I
Yeah.
knew it was an Egyptian obelisk. I didn't realize it was the tallest in the world. And not only that, what's crazy to think about is that it's actually been in Rome longer than it was in Egypt.
Really? That's pretty interesting to think about. Yeah.
And I just thought it was crazy that it's been there so long. And not only that, it was lost multiple times. It was in Egypt so long, then Rome took it, brought it, and they put it in the Circus Maximus. And then as the Circus Maximus decayed over time, it wasn't until like the 1500s one of the popes had some archaeologists that was digging through and found the obelisk and they rebuilt it, and the pope in the 1500s asked him to put it in that um, plaza san giovanni piazza san giovanni.
Nice.
Another interesting thing I saw was that they think that, and again we're going purely off of x-rays of an old mummy, that they looked at, because we have Thutmose the Fourth, we have his mummy, we have his entire body.
Yeah.
So they did scans of him, and they think that he suffered from familial temporal epilepsy, which probably caused his early death, but also they think might explain why he kept passing out and having dreams like the one underneath the Sphinx and having these visions
Ooh.
that would happen. And they said there's no full proof. They said it looks like he suffered from that, but we can never know for sure if that's what caused it. But I thought that was a very
Yeah,
interesting.
speaking of having the obelisk, I also did think it was crazy that this is the dream stele. It's still just in the Sphinx, and I'd never really
Yeah.
heard someone exactly mention it, or I guess I never knew what it was.
Yeah.
But it's funny that it is such a specific thing for it seems like it'd be like, oh, like this must be some tablet that lays out the laws of Egypt, right? Because it's between the Sphinx of Giza, but it's literally one pharaoh being like, I usurped power because I'm probably a random guy that just took power in Egypt. So I'm gonna say that I had a dream where Ra told me to become king. And maybe that's why they switched to Ra. Maybe it's because there really was a shift. This should be a new dynasty
Oh,
secretly.
well, no, no, no. He wasn't a
He was
random.
definitely
He
the son.
was he was the
Oh,
son. It's just that he wasn't the primary son from the main wife.
okay, okay. Yeah,
So,
the only other things I have for him was that he didn't, I mean, you probably already said this, but a big thing about him was that we've heard so much war, war, war. All the Thutmoses were really into war. You know, they started kind of the dynasty and took over a lot. And then by the time we get to Thutmose the fourth, he's like, you know what? Like, he actually made the smart decision, in my opinion, of maybe I could keep expanding. I could go further into Nubia. I could go further into like Anatolia, but he's like, I'm chilling. Like everything's good in the Nile. We got a lot of wheat coming in. So he
well,
just
what I thought was funny is
built.
that they were talking about how Egypt had nowhere to really expand to. It's not that they were too weak, but they'd already made peace with the Mitanni, so that kind of secured their north and western border.
Right.
East was the Mediterranean, and they could go east more further south, in the Sahara, which wasn't that advantageous, and they could go more south into Nubia, but they already controlled all of Nubia. So I they're sort of like, this is it. They were the biggest, strongest empire. They had so much gold. And with all the trade, they had like lapis lazuli, they had silver, they had hide, they had, I don't know, they talked about how Egypt wanted for nothing, which feeds into then Amenhotep III.
Amenhotep the third. So I feel like Amenhotep the third, he's not the Napoleon of Egypt. We already heard him. That was, I guess, that was Thutmose the second, right?
Hmm.
But Amenhotep the third is almost like Amenhotep the Great. He's sometimes known, where he doesn't do a ton of war, but he really kind of makes his kingdom very rich and like he spreads like splendor, I would say is the best
Oh
way.
no, I get what you mean. They call this the Golden Age. He
Yeah.
led the Golden Age. He actually had zero, literally zero military campaigns, expeditions, or engagements at all. There weren't even revolts during his time period. They're like,
Yeah.
so it was kind of funny because he said he was so focused on like sports and hunting and other things like that because he needed some way to prove that he was a warrior king when there's literally no war and no one to conquer. You have everything. So he focused so much on like, whoa, did you hear? Because you probably saw too, like, did you hear how many boar I killed when I went on this hunt? It's like, I mean, I
Yeah, he
guess.
he dug like a pit of some sort with all these pigs and hogs inside of it, and he just started shooting them and killed like 80 hogs with arrows. He took a break at some point and
So
came
he took
back
a 4-day break, but not for him, for his horses. They
for his
needed the 4 days.
forces.
He didn't need it at
Yeah,
all. He could have kept going.
but it kind of makes sense because it's kind of true that the power of Egypt had kind of been built up in this aggressive way where they'd been pushing kind of in both directions, but mainly north. And they kind of hit their limit of logic of just, it just makes sense for us to just be the empire of the Nile. We don't really want to stretch ourselves too much. I just feel like Egypt, that's one of their things too, is they're a very conservative empire. Their art, just everything about their
Yeah.
society does not like change, and it doesn't want to grow that big. It's like, all right, be careful, be careful. So I don't know. I love it. We're not going to talk even all about Amenhotep because he rules all the way from 1390 to 1353. So
Yeah,
we're
but one of the things I thought was interesting is, again, and there's probably a couple later, but he was another one who was, because he had so much free time, he was obsessed religiously with Ra and
yeah.
actually other foreign gods. He was interested in just the idea of why not seek support of these other foreign gods. And like, I'm curious about your guys' religions and stuff like that, which I thought was just very interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly it starts that you have all these warlike rulers, and then you just get like one ruler during peacetime, and all of a sudden he's like a philosopher and he's really into religion.
Well, they make fun of that too, though, which might happen later. I don't know. But the whole, what do they call it? The term was coined with you walk up the stairs in leather sandals, but down them in silk slippers.
Right. I guess it's like the whole like bad times make strong men make good times, which make weak men, which make bad times. Yeah, it's like the whole
Well, no, and the thing is, I'm actually not even advocating for that specifically, which I know is kind of what I said. But I
yeah.
guess what I mean is you need the strongmen to create these eras of peace because I feel like a lot of people think that,
Yeah.
oh, without war, that's what made Egypt weak. And it's like, it's not what made them weak. It allowed them to branch out, to do things they never had the time for, to consider different religions and different technologies and stuff like that. It's
I
just
think
that a side effect of that is they
yeah.
don't know war very well at all because they don't have experience, which can be bad, but you get so many other positives with it.
I guess you just have to at least have soldiers at your borders. If there is war, then at least you have generals that are ready for it, but you can just sort of have peace most of the time. And but you're right. I think it's kind of like empires want to reach a certain size, and once they hit that point, it's usually some sort of geographical thing. Then it's like, okay, we can get bigger than this, but we're not going to be able to hold it for more than a couple decades. So we might as well just stay here and make everything more stable.
Well, yeah, and I was looking at it when Amenhotep the First took over was 1525. So we've been at, the 18th dynasty has been ruling for like 130 years at this point. So, or more. So it's
Yeah.
caused such stability. There's a reason this part is remembered. Like the 18th dynasty is the one that's the most well known, the New Kingdom period.
Yeah.
Like,
This really feels like the period where so much you realize, oh, this is why know Egypt is because of all the things from this time period.
yeah, because spoiler alert, this is also like Tutankhamun and all that stuff is this
Yeah.
dynasty.
Yeah, and even though I'm about to talk about a bunch of
Yeah.
these other
But
empires, they
Egypt was the world power at this time. Like if Egypt
yeah.
joined any side in a fight, that side won.
Exactly. It's
So
almost like they're all communicating with Egypt, and we know quite a bit about them starting at the end of this time period we're talking about because Egypt is so stable that they're writing so much and sending so many letters and all these sort of things that we know about the countries they were sending them to, and then the countries they're sending them to are prospering and writing and all that sort of thing. So it's funny how much I'm about to mention Egypt when I'm talking about the hit every single Hittite and Hurrian, whatever.
well, yeah. Because speaking of that, then what? Because we both have notes. What region are we moving to
So
next? Looking
let's
at the map.
start with Mesopotamia because I feel like they're
Okay.
sort of our forgotten, first
I mean, they
child.
used to be the center of this podcast.
I know it's
So
like we had a firstborn and they kind of like got really into drugs or something, and we kind of like lost contact with them in their 20s, but now they're like 28 and they're like actually like I'm clean now. And like I don't
they're
know. That's
pulling a
what it
Robert
feels
Downey
like to
Jr. or
me.
something.
I don't know why
So
that's what I'm thinking about, but I just miss them, and it's like we keep saying, "Oh, the Kassites, we don't know anything about them." Like whatever, let's just talk about Egypt more. There is stuff going on, so I'm cheating a little bit, but we hadn't talked about him. This guy, Dash, and he is a Kassite ruler in about 1410, and his renown was apparently so great that later on this guy Shutruk Nahunte would go on to ransack Babylon around 250 years later, and he boasted, "I destroyed Karande." And he's basically saying instead of saying Babylon, he's calling it Karande.
well, I mean, this
Karanda.
is Cardunias is now this region. It's not
Oh,
Babylon.
interesting. So I didn't realize that. Yeah.
After they retook the Sealand Empire, they renamed it the Cardunias Empire,
Hmm.
or I guess Kingdom. Yeah.
That's cool. So yeah, it seems like it's kind of after this guy, and he was basically, they think, very likely the Babylonian king who sent precious gifts like lapis lazuli to Pharaoh Thutmose III, during his campaign where he was attacking the Mitanni, his eighth campaign.
They said he marked the beginning of the Kassites integrating into the Mesopotamian Sumerian culture rather than trying to replace it and
Oh.
supersede it. Which I just think is funny that after all this time,
Hmm.
the Sumerian culture is so strong. They were the first
Yeah.
ones. Then there were the Akkadians who tried to like overtake it, and they did. They were the Akkadian Empire. But then the Sumerian traditions came in, and it became Sumerian Akkadian practices. Then
Yeah.
Babylon comes along, and they're like, "No, we're Babylon. We're not Sumer and Akkad." But then they slowly just become, "Well, we're Babylon of Sumer and Akkad." And then now these guys come in, and they're like, they change the name. They're like, "Oh, it's Cardunias." And just like, oh, actually, we're just gonna do what the Sumerians were doing. Like we kind of like that.
Yeah, there is something about Sumerian. My guess is it's probably a big part of it is just they were the first to really have what we think of as all these civilizations. They were kind of the first to do it. So if you're kind of a newer guy in town, you might be on top for a while, but it does seem inevitable that if you're in Mesopotamia, you're eventually just going to become Sumerian, something
Yes,
back
it's
Sumerian.
blowing my mind that that's what keeps happening over and over again.
It is really funny. So yeah, then the next, I guess his son is Kadashman Harbe. So we're gonna get a lot of good names in this episode. So Kadashman Harbe had an aggressive campaign against the Sutu, who were a nomadic people that lived along the Middle Euphrates. They're related to the Aramaeans, and
That
he
name sounds
claimed,
so familiar, but I don't.
yeah, I think
Are
it's
they
in the
from the
Bible.
Bible? They might be from the Bible.
Yeah, there's Semitic people who are in like Syria, yeah. So he says he claims to have annihilated their extensive forces, then constructed fortresses in a mountain region called Hihi, Hihi, in the Syrian desert. So anyway, this guy, Kadashman Harbe, he dug wells and settled people on fertile lands to strengthen the guard. So he built up some fortresses, and then hit the next ruler after him is the last one we're going to end on because he's around 1375, and he apparently was a seems like a pretty honorable guy because he turned down a request from the Canaanites to form an alliance against Egypt and was responsible for the most extensive and widespread building programs, which can you can still see in
Well,
the
he
area.
made a new ziggurat.
Yeah, he built a couple things, and apparently, when this is just a bunch of weird names, so I kind of just want to say this whole sentence. When Herbatilla, possibly the successor of Tepti Ahar to the throne of Elam, began raiding the Babylonian Empire, he taunted Kurigalzu, who's this guy we're talking about, to do battle with him at Dersulgi. So he basically rode in on his horse and was like taunting Kurigalzi. So then Kurigalzi launches a campaign against them, and he defeats them and captures Herbatali, and we never see him in any other inscriptions again after that. So left up to the reader's imagination. And then apparently Kurigalzi went on to conquer the eastern lands of Susiana and Elam. So we actually have the Mesopotamians doing their thing they haven't done in a while and temporarily conquering Elam, which
Yeah,
will
I
establish
mean, to be
something.
fair, we're Bronze Age, and that's where a lot of tin comes from. So that's
Yeah.
not a bad area to control.
When we get to Persia, it's still so far away, but the payoff is going to be so good because we've just been mentioning Elam, and eventually we're going to mention them more. So it's also thought that this guy Kurigalzi may have installed as his vassal this guy Iggy Hulky, who we're going to hear about
Ooh.
later, who might have been a founder of a new dynasty, I think in Arzawa. So remember that name, Iggy Hulky, and this guy put him in there. And he apparently gave his daughter to Amenhotep III, and he would also, I guess, wed Kurigalzu's granddaughter. So yeah, he built a lot of stuff. The Ningal Temple at Ur, and apparently he had some house for hanging up the exalted tablets. So I think that's one reason we're about to get the Amarna letters, is I think these kings are starting to show more of an interest in tablets and writing stuff down, and they probably partially want it to be remembered in history, so they're writing a ton but it's great for us Egyptologists because we can learn a lot. And he was apparently the first king to build a royal residence bearing his name. And he built the fortress called Dur Kurigalzu, the fortress of Kurigalzu in the north of Babylonia. And it basically protected an important trade route that led east across the Iranian plateau to Afghanistan, where it had lapis lazuli. And next week, we're going to talk about the next guy is Kadashman Enlil. But
Ooh.
now we're going into the Hittites here in Anatolia. This guy, Arnuwanda, was in charge from 1390 to 1380. He fought with Arzawa on a couple occasions. And on the second time, we mentioned him last time, but I got a little more information on him. So they rescued their recalcitrant vassal, Maduwata, who had attacked Arzawa on his own. So I love this character of Maduwata. And the Hittites, led by the general Kisnapli, saved Maduwata again, this time from an attack from Artusia or Atreus. He was the son of Pelops, who is basically the reason it's called the Peloponnesians. And he's the father of Agamemnon and
Whoa.
Menelaus. So Atreus might have been a real guy that fought the Hittites, which is pretty cool. So this guy Maduwata subsequently betrayed Kisnapali's movements to the enemy, to the Arzawans, and basically that caused the ambushing and destruction of the Hittite forces, but he avoided punishment, which is just insane. And then so that's why the Hittites are kind of quiet right now. They're focusing on Arzawa.
That makes sense. I mean, and that was kind of the point. Urzawa had always been like a thorn in their side. So, because that gets right into
Yeah.
Tudhalia the second or third, you know.
Yeah, so Tudalia the Third. It was at this point that apparently the capital was burnt down by these guys, Casca.
Well, yeah, and that's where Arzawa, the Mitanni, and then some people in the north all attacked them at once, and then kind of came in and they lost so much territory, and they were pushed out of Hattusa, which got burned to the ground.
They moved the capital, yeah. And apparently, I don't know where this comes from, but calls it the concentric invasions of Hatti. So it seems like the Hittites are just suddenly getting invaded from all sides.
I was gonna say it's such a big deal that they talk about how Egypt, Mitanni, and Arzawa all thought like the Hittites were gone. In fact, Arzawa started being like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, we're like in charge of Anatolia now and trying to
Yeah.
make treaties with Egypt." I was gonna say too, because you're doing your podcast about England. Some people said that the Tudhalia the second or third, or whatever we want to go with, hiding and having to have his army and stuff. They said it was very similar to Alfred hiding in the swamplands when the Danes overran Wessex and everything like that, and he had to sort of put together an army and retake everything.
That is what it seems like. And apparently, yeah, the Amenhotep the Third wrote to Tarhu. Oh, wow. All right. Tarunhar Doradu. He was the king of Arzawa, and he said, I've heard that everything is finished and that the land of Hattusa is paralyzed.
Yeah, I have that written down too because I thought that was very interesting.
I wanted to like set the scene for next week because we're going to have a lot of civilizations connecting and clashing and allying. So I wanted to lay out what's going on everywhere. So moving on to the Mitanni, this guy Artatama was a king of the Hurrian kingdom of Mitanni, and his reign coincided with Thutmose IV. He's believed to be the son of Shaushtatar, who we
Yes.
mentioned, and he's the grandfather of Tushratta and father of Shatarna II, who will establish an alliance with Thutmose IV of Egypt. Um,
But this is the guy who first proposed the alliance or peace. It didn't go through in his lifetime, but he's the one who first was like, we need
okay.
something in place.
Yeah, so because they had the Hittites in the north and Egypt in the south, he approached Amenhotep II, I guess, with an offer to divide up Syria. But the Egyptians suspected foul play because they didn't give a definitive answer for years. They didn't want to do it. And at one point during the reign of Thutmose IV, they proposed a marriage between him and Artatama's daughter, but Artatama actually rejected the offer. And they were saying, oh, unknown reasons. And I'm like, well, they're not agreeing to your alliance.
Yeah.
So
You're not
that's,
getting everything you want from the treaty, so why just go through with it?
yeah, like your bargaining chip is your daughter. And you're like, hey, why don't we just divide up Syria a little bit, just a little, you can have most of it. But apparently it did take, they gave 7 marriage proposals before this Mitanni guy, Artatama, finally agreed. And then, so he was succeeded by his son, Shatarna the second, and he didn't really do too much.
His main thing, and I don't think you can give him this accomplishment, but using our previous reference, he's the one who's standing at the top of the staircase. His parents have gone up in leather sandals, and his children will go down in silk slippers. Like, he is at the absolute pinnacle of power that the Mitanni are going to have.
Interesting.
He
Yeah,
had
that makes
strong
sense.
alliances. He had a good relationship with Amenhotep III.
Yeah,
Uh,
he gave his daughter to him.
yeah,
As I said, that would be a trend. And then the last one I just wanted to mention was Arta Shumara, and he was only a ruler briefly. He was a brother of Tushratta, and he later will get assassinated by a pro-Hittite group.
and it starts a whole succession crisis that we'll definitely talk about next time.
So that'll be pretty cool. There's a lot to talk about because, yeah, um, at the end of this era, like we said, the Mitanni have been doing pretty well overall, but this assassination by this sort of like Hittite spy network, it seems like, or something, it feels very Assassin's Creed, um, is going to
Well, yeah,
have
the
it.
Templars didn't exist yet, so there's no one to keep them in check.
Right. So I guess it was just to give a little taste of it. It was led by this guy Tuhi, who declares himself as a regent, and he puts this guy Tushratta on the throne. Do you want to say what Tushratta does, or save it?
I think we can save it.
But just know Tushratta does something. Um, so I'm excited about that. And then we're last. Actually, we just got, yeah, a couple more. But in Elam, we have this guy that I mentioned before. Do you remember his name? I said, remember this guy's name.
I don't remember actually.
Wow, you're gonna be like, oh, of course, when I say it. Iggy Hulky.
Oh,
Iggy Hulky. So
Iggy
we're in
Hulky.
Elam.
I remember that because I was thinking of the Hulk the whole time. So,
Right. So they're the orange here. They're basically what's going to be Persia eventually. And they're like kind of the furthest east power that we're going to talk about for a while. But he was a king of Susa and Anshan. And in one of his inscriptions, it says the goddess Manzat Ishtar granted him the kingship. And he has no ancestor king, so it seems like he also started a new dynasty that's apparently called the Iggy because, like I said, it seems like he got put onto the throne by the Babylonian king Kurigalzu.
yeah.
So he was sort of like the puppet king there. And then, but he will have a dynasty. And then he has a son, Ishshan, who will marry a sister of the Babylonian king Kurigalzu. And then after that, so it's very short. Then after that, there's Atar Kata. He has nothing of note to do. And then there's Humban Numina, and he married a daughter of Kurigalzu, who will have this guy Untash Napirisha, and this guy is going to be a big deal.
Oh
So
shit.
just
I
remember
mean,
the
with a
name.
name like that, how could he not be?
Remember the name Untash Napirisha.
There's a reason it's so common nowadays.
He's not going to be around all the way until 1300, but apparently he's the son of this guy, so he must have been old. And then we couldn't forget about good old Assyria. So these are some really great names we got going on here. We have Ashur Bel Nisheshu, and he apparently um, had a treaty with Karandas of Babylon. So then the next guy is Ashur Nadin Ahi the second, which means the god Ashur has given a brother. And he basically, all we know about him is that he at some point got gold from Egypt. And when he died, his uncle took over, which is interesting. Normally, you don't hear about an uncle taking over. His name was Ariba Adad, and we don't really know how he took the throne, but it says usually when there's a nephew uncle succession in Assyrian history, they were bloody affairs. And he styled himself the regent of Enlil, and he was the first Assyrian monarch to do so since Samshi Adad in the 1800s. Isn't that insane that it was 400 years
Also, I
later?
just remember Shamshi Adad. I can't remember which one it is, but I
Samshi
remember that
Adad,
name.
he was a big deal. He was a big Assyrian guy. He kind of was like, I feel like one of the first that actually put them on the map. So I think that he's seeing himself as that. And basically, again, his son and successor, Ashur Uballit, is going to take full advantage of this power and do something pretty big. I'm not going to say it yet, but I wanted to mention Assyria for sure. And then we've talked about a lot, but I did have something I wanted to say about Arzawa because I just think they're cool um, because of their connection with ancient Greece and all of that cool stuff. There's this guy Kupanta Karunta, and this is when Madhuwata um, made an alliance with this guy who married Madhuwata's daughter. So this is that weird guy from before, the weird spy. And he apparently when Madhuwata allied with this Arzawan guy, Kapunta
Hmm.
Karunta, he was telling the Hittites, "Oh, it's a ploy." And what I didn't realize is that what I read here was that it seems like Madhuwata then took Arzawa, so he then took over
Huh.
Arzawa himself after all that, which I don't know why other things hadn't mentioned that. Then after that, we have this guy Tarhun Tarudu, and he did a lot of more war. He penetrated far into Hittite Empire and weakened, which was because they were weakened by the Casca people up north. And he penetrated as far as the Hittite city of Tuwanuwa. So I don't know exactly where that is, but it's somewhat into their territory, pretty deep in there. And he, again, like we keep saying, he negotiated with and wed one of his daughters to Amenhotep III, who called him a great king. So the Arzawans are being called great kings now. One of them might be Atreus. So
Ooh.
they're going to be a player for a little bit. So remember their name. Then I have nothing to say about Greece, and we can basically just end it on something that I've been wanting to mention, and apparently is the point, right around 1500. So actually, we kind of missed it. But villages were built in Sardinia, in sort of to the west of Italy, this island, which me and you have actually been to. But they have this civilization that we don't really know too much about, but they actually were a really early civilization, and they had these little castle things that almost look like medieval Norman or something, like medieval
Yeah, we
Europe.
got to see them. That was cool.
Yeah. So just know they're out there. They don't have a ton of interaction that we know about with all these, or evidence that we know of with all these cultures, but I think they were one of the sea people, and maybe we'll talk more about them, but they are just getting started now and building these pretty tall, impressive watchtower castles sort of deals. All right. I feel like we kind of laid the scene of there's a lot of names, but how would you
Yeah.
summarize what's happening right now geopolitically? How would you summarize it in a couple sentences?
Egypt is the powerhouse. We're seeing Egypt's culture influence and their resources kind of almost playing kingmaker for everybody else. Um, but we're also on the, it sounds so generic to say it, we're on like the precipice of
Hmm.
something new.
Yeah, like Arzawa's getting more powerful, the Hittites are shrinking, Mitanni shrinking. So it's the Hittites and Mitanni are both kind of shrinking, but them along with Babylon are and Elam are still they're getting stable where you can't really knock them fully out. Even when you really destroy them, they build back up with some other ruler. So they're all there, they're all trading, and so even though there are going to be battles, it's really a time in the next episode that's going to be a lot of the Amarna letters. It's cool to have first person accounts where they're writing letters to each other and describing exactly what's going on and all their treaties and a lot of, betrayals and
Yep.
intrigue. So look forward to that. But I'm glad we did this episode to set the scene. So the next episode, I feel like we're going to spend a good amount of time on, you know, Egypt and other stuff like that. So any last thoughts? All right. Well, um, get lost.